The New York Islanders beat the Winnipeg Jets 3-2 in what may be Brock Nelson's last game as an Islander. What does the future hold between now and the trade deadline for Nelson, Palmieri, and several other players? We'll dig into all of that and more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. I'm Gil Martin. I have been covering the New York Islanders for almost 2 decades, and I wrote the book Ice Wars on the history of the Islanders' rivalry with the Rangers. So glad you could join us today to talk a little Islanders hockey, especially now when the next few days are going to be critical to the future of this franchise. And let's get started with the game Tuesday night, the last game the Islanders play before the trade deadline, a 3-2 win over the team with the best record in the NHL coming into the game, the Winnipeg Jets. And look, the Islanders did kind of the opposite of what they did against the Rangers just one previous day before this. Against the Rangers, the Islanders came out, played really well for the first 5-7 minutes of the game, and then absolutely disappeared. Last night against the Jets, the Islanders came out, were on their heels. They were being outshot 10-2 at one point in the first period. And then Anders Lee dropping the gloves with Adam Lowry as the two team captains went at each other. And I have to say that Lee's fight, even though I don't think he won the fight, did inspire the Islanders. It was, in many ways, the turning point of the hockey game. And from that point on, the Islanders were the better team. And we saw guys make efforts that we just didn't see on a regular basis throughout the course of the season. And it was both touching and ironic and bittersweet that the first 2 goals of this game were scored by the 2 players on expiring contracts who are most likely to be moved if the Islanders are trading players away. And that's Kyle Palmieri and Brock Nelson. And both of them get their 20th goal of the season. So they reach that milestone and gave the Islanders a 2-0 lead that they absolutely never lost, and did a much better job defensively. In the last 50 minutes of this game, they allowed only 18 shots. And, 5-on-5, the Islanders did not allow a goal. And that was encouraging. Better games for the duo of Pelech and Polak. Polak with a goal. Pelech had 5 shots on goal. Overall, this Islanders team back-checked. They did a better job of getting the puck out of the zone. And a team like Winnipeg, which is big, fast, physical, the Islanders were able to match them and, in fact, even exceed what they did for most of this game. And that was, it's one of those things. See, here's the thing. I can talk about this and just look at last night's game against the Jets and say, this is what this team is capable of. They go out and beat the team with the best record in hockey and outplayed them for the majority of the game, beat Connor Hellebuck, the best goalie right now in the league, according to most people. played smart, efficient hockey. But all you have to do is go back one more step, one more day, and realize that the problem this Islanders team has had all year, and it goes back even beyond this year, but let's stick to the 2024-2025 season. The issue the Islanders have had is inconsistency. And so, yes, they are capable of beating the Winnipeg Jets like they did last night. They are capable of going on a 7-game winning streak as they did in December and January. But they are also capable of playing some really bad hockey, some flat efforts, and the fact that they cannot sustain excellence or even being very good for very long is a big, big issue for this franchise. Their ceiling remains barely making or barely missing the playoffs. And when that is the case and the team is getting older, moves have to be made. And, going into last night's game, and shout out to Keith Amato, friend of the show, who sent me this information on X. But basically, according to Money Puck, the Islanders had about a 15% chance of making the playoffs heading into last night's game against the Jets. And the scoreboard was very kind to the Islanders last night. Philadelphia lost. Columbus lost. Detroit lost. Boston lost. And the Islanders won. It doesn't get any better than that when you're, scoreboard watching at this point. And so the Islanders passed the Flyers in the standings, but they remain, 3 points out of that playoff berth with 5 teams that they need to pass and 6 that they need to stay ahead of in order to make the playoffs. And so maybe that win moves the needle from a 15% chance of qualifying for the postseason to a 18% chance. But it's still, not looking good. And if you need to get to 93 points to make the playoffs, and that's probably the number we're talking about right now. The Islanders right now have 63 points, so they need 30 more points in 21 games, which would mean 14-5-2 would have to be roughly what they do the rest of the way. And look, no offense to the guys on this team, but based on the first 61 games of the year, 14-5-2, not realistic. And even that doesn't guarantee them a playoff spot, depending on how the other teams in this race do. And it was an emotional night. You felt the emotion in the building. And if you were able to watch the post-game show where Shannon Hogan was interviewing Brock Nelson after the game, the emotion was there. And the fans were cheering Brock Nelson, and Brock Nelson and Shannon Hogan were both getting choked up during the interview. You could hear the lump in Brock Nelson's throat and the emotion in Shannon Hogan's voice. Everybody knows that this could have been Brock Nelson's last game as an Islander. And ironically, he gets to the 20-goal mark. He plays in his 901st game as an Islander, passing Bobby Nystrom on the Islanders' all-time games played list with the franchise. Nystrom had 900. Ties Pat LaFontaine for the most points in a career by an American-born New York Islander. These are all really great milestones. And I'll say this. Brock Nelson has been a great New York Islander. He has earned those milestones that we talked about. He has given his all for this franchise since he got here. And it isn't easy to say that, hey, we're better off moving on from Brock Nelson. But we're better off moving on from Brock Nelson because of his age, because of the way this team is put together and all the flaws inherent with that, because of the salary cap situation, because of the lack of prospects right now in this team, the fact that they're, again, probably only about an 18% chance, give or take a point, that's my estimate, of making the playoffs, and the fact that Brock Nelson could chase a Stanley Cup more realistically by signing elsewhere, could probably make more money for more years if he goes elsewhere, and it just makes sense for this team. But that doesn't take away the emotion of the moment. And it doesn't take away that Brock Nelson and Kyle Palmieri, who is, a Long Island guy, they mean a lot to this team. And their legacy with the organization is secure. But there's a time for almost everything. And right now, it's probably the time to move on from Brock Nelson and Kyle Palmieri. But we'll see what Lou Lamoriello does. Did this win over the Winnipeg Jets change the way Lou Lamoriello is thinking about the trade deadline? We're going to talk about that. We'll have our weekly farm report, and we have a very difficult Islanders birthday of the day, a center who was with the team in the mid-90s. Let's see if you can guess who that is. He only played a handful of games with the Islanders over 3 seasons. We've got all that and more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you could place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you could even combine your live bets in the same game parlay. I love using the live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3. I never feel like I've missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So that's it. There are no games left between now and Friday's trade deadline, which is at 3 o'clock Eastern time. Keep in mind that trades can be made before then, but won't be announced, sometimes till 3:30, 4 o'clock, because the paperwork has to be filed with the league and all of that little detail stuff. But by 4:15, 4:30 Eastern time on Friday, we are going to know what's going on with the New York Islanders and what Lou Lamoriello did or didn't do at the trade deadline. And I'm going to say this. The win over the Jets, in my mind, does not change the equation. It was a nice win. I was happy to see it. It is really sort of what this team is capable of if it's hitting on all cylinders. But it just isn't something that they're able to do on a consistent basis. And, you can use a million excuses. You could talk about the injuries. You could talk about bad bounces and puck luck, and you could talk about how close this team remains to a playoff spot. They're not that many points out, but they are still having to pass that many teams. And, they could be 3-4 points further out by the time they take the ice again Saturday when they begin their West Coast trip in San Jose. This team still needs to retool. And though Lou Lamoriello has said in the past, there are two things that he has said that stick in my mind. Number one, if you have time, use it. Well, he only has a couple more days till Friday. But the second thing he says is that he doesn't believe in rebuilding or retooling. And I'll say this. The worst thing the Islanders can do, there are three choices that this team has, okay? They can trade Nelson and Palmieri. Let's put the other guys on this roster aside. Those are the two guys on expiring contracts. So you could trade Brock Nelson and Kyle Palmieri. It is a seller's market right now. You'll get a very good return. And, Palmieri should get at least a second rounder, maybe more at this point. Maybe a second rounder and a player, or a second rounder and a prospect. Nelson should get you a first rounder, a pick, the first round pick, a player, and a prospect, similar to what the Islanders gave up to get Bo Horvat. There is a lot to be gained by making a trade of these two players at this point. That, to me, still makes the most sense. You take a step back to try to take 2 steps forward, to try to make this team, and every dayers, you've heard me say it, this team needs to get younger, faster, and more skilled. Brock Nelson, 34. Kyle Palmieri, 33. They've been great players for this team, but I don't want to sign them to a 4 or 5 year contract at this stage in their career where you're going to be paying $6-7 million a year and get diminishing returns after year 1 or year 2. That doesn't make sense, especially when you, again, have an aging core and no prospects ready to step in and really contribute to this team. All of the top prospects, the Cole Yzermans, the Danny Nelsons, all of the guys that everyone is talking about as being real potential NHL prospects are 2 to 3 years away. So bringing in a number 1 pick, bringing in a highly rated prospect and a player who can fill in the meantime, similar to, when the Islanders gave up Anthony Beauvillier to the Canucks. Think about the deal for Bo Horvat. Anthony Beauvillier, Atu Ratu, who was the top prospect and a number 1 pick. If you can get that back for Brock Nelson and then get a player and a second-round pick or a prospect and a second-round pick for Kyle Palmieri, it just makes the most sense long-term for this organization. The second option is that you re-sign Brock Nelson and or Kyle Palmieri. I like this option a little. I think it's the wrong move, but I think it's a very Lou Lamoriello-esque kind of move. He likes his guys. He likes veterans. He believes in loyalty, sometimes I think to a fault, and he wants to keep the gang together, even though the gang hasn't won a playoff series in 3 years, and most likely this year will be the 4th year. I can live with it if it's a 2-year contract, 3 at most, and the terms are reasonable. I wouldn't like it as much as the trades I just described. I would disagree with the direction, but at least it's a direction. Okay? And then the third option is you stand pat at the deadline or you add at the deadline. Adding at the deadline is mortgaging the future, whether it's trading away a prospect or draft picks in order to try to get, a Brock Besser or, I don't think Pedersen is coming here anyway, but to bring in a scorer, a guy who could help this team make the playoffs right now. I don't agree with that strategy, but I could see Lou thinking that way. And I think that's bad long term. It makes the retool into a rebuild. But the other option, the third thing is you stand pat. And you run the risk of losing Palmieri and Nelson for nothing. And the most likely two things that could happen if that is what you do is either you miss the playoffs altogether and then lose them for nothing. You could re-sign them, but you could also re-sign them if you trade them away. They are rentals. You could bring them back and still get the picks and the prospects and the players if they want to re-sign here. But overall, losing them for nothing, risking that is foolish at this point. If you really believe in Brock Nelson and Kyle Palmieri and you want them to be part of this team's future, trade them and re-sign them and have your cake and eat it too. Do not hold on to them on the 18% chance that you could make the playoffs and the way slimmer chance that you could win a round or two and then have aging players coming back or aging players just leaving. It just doesn't make any sense for this franchise long term. And I have heard some people argue, hey, why would you trade away, two of our better players? We don't have enough goal scoring, and you're going to trade away two 20-goal guys. And these are the players that make our team as good as they are. But I think the bottom line is this. When your core hasn't won a playoff series in 3, probably 4 years, and it's getting older, you sometimes need to take one step back to take 2 steps forward. And a failure to do that, you fall out of the muddy middle and into the basement, and then you're talking Chicago Blackhawks, San Jose Sharks, 5, 6 years of being the worst team in the league and hoping that you can build back up to be a winner. And I don't want the Islanders to go through that. I think most Islander fans, I give them credit. They can accept taking one step back to take 2 steps forward. You bring in young players who are improving, who have potential, and you say to the fans, hey, we may not win in 2025, 2026, but we have a really good chance of being really good a year or 2 later, and you're going to see exciting young players improve. I think Islander fans are sophisticated enough, the majority of them, to accept that, whereas standing pat just isn't going to cut it. All right, more to get to on today's show. We have our weekly farm report, plus our Islanders birthday of the day. All that and more next on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. It's time for our weekly farm report on all things Bridgeport Islanders. We do this every Wednesday during the AHL season, so let's get right to it. 3 games for the Islanders since our last farm report, and it wasn't pretty. Last Wednesday, the Providence Bruins beat the Islanders 5-1. The only goal, Isaiah George scoring that, but it wasn't good for the Islanders, who just got beaten badly by the Providence Bruins. And look, you got to look at the bright side, right? At least you got a goal from Isaiah George, who hopefully will be back on the island next year or shortly thereafter. Then Friday night, it was the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, and the Islanders lose 5-2 at home against Lehigh Valley. Isaiah George scoring again. That gave him a three-game point streak. And Eetu Liukas also scored. Henrik Tikkanen, 27 saves. He was the starter in each of the last two games that I described. But again, the Islanders were on their heels, outshot 16-5 in that first period. And then on Saturday, they faced Lehigh Valley again, end up losing by a score of 5-3. 2 goals for Brian Pinho, but that wasn't enough. Pinho basically now with 21 goals on the season. Matthew Maggio also scoring. Tristan Lennox making his AHL debut. He had 17 saves, but gave up, the rest of the goals. And, well, an 0-3 week for Bridgeport. Chris Terry still leading the team with 50 points. He has 16 goals. Brian Pinho leads the team in goals with 21. Liam Foudy with 17. Those are the only 3 players with 10 or more goals after 53 games for this team. Samuel Bolduc, 29 points. That leads all defensemen. He has 7 goals. Alex Jeffries, 8 goals, 23 points. Maggio, 7 goals, 17 points. Dufour, 7 goals, 16 points. And it's just not looking all that good for the Bridgeport Islanders. You look at the standings. They've played 54 games. They are 12, 36, and 6th. They are 24 games under 500. And by far, again, the worst record in the AHL. They have a .278 point percentage. No other team is below 30. So, again, it's just been a struggle right now for the Bridgeport Islanders. They have a couple of games coming up, actually 3 games coming up. Tonight, they will be in Hartford to face the Hartford Wolfpack. That is the Rangers AHL club. And then Saturday, Bridgeport will host the Toronto Marlies. Sunday, they will host the Springfield Thunderbirds. It's a 7 o'clock start on Saturday, a 3 o'clock matinee on Sunday. So if you want to check out some of the Islanders prospects, head on over to Bridgeport. You could see them, or you could watch both home and road games on AHL TV. Again, we do our weekly farm report every Wednesday during the Bridgeport Islanders season, but it hasn't been an easy year. Let's put it that way. Time now for our Islanders birthday of the day. And, well, Thursday will be the 53rd birthday of former Islanders center Chris Taylor, the Stratford, Ontario native, a second-round pick of the Islanders back in 1990, had a 50-goal, 128-point season for the London Knights, made his NHL debut with the Isles in 94-95, playing 10 games. He had 3 assists, played 11 games in 95-96, 1 more in 96-97, and then moved on to play for the Bruins, the Sabres, and then finished his career in the minors and in Germany. Played in 149 career NHL games, 11 goals, 32 points, 48 penalty minutes, and 2 playoff games in which he had 2 penalty minutes, but those came with the Buffalo Sabres. One of his better games as an Islander, April 18th, 1995, Les Quebec Nordiques in to visit the Nassau Coliseum, taking on the Islanders. Stéphane Fiset, the goalie for Quebec. Tommy Salo in between the pipes for the Islanders. And our Islanders birthday of the day, Chris Taylor sets up Derek King for a power play goal. Ziggy Palffy, the other assist. That made it 1-0 Islanders just 3 minutes and 9 seconds into the game. And Taylor then also sets up Zygmunt Palffy for the last goal of the game. Derek King, the other assist. Islanders end up beating the Nordique by a score of 5-2. 40 saves for Tommy Salo, but for Chris Taylor, he had 2 assists. He was a +1 and had 4 shots on goal. Chris Taylor, briefly an Islander, but a second-round pick way back in 1990. He is our Islanders' birthday of the day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast. It brings you the daily league-wide stories that matter with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, email us at lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to discuss whatever it is that's on your mind. And we'll mention you on the show when we do so. You can follow the show on X at Locked On Isles. You can follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYRVSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long, and especially leading up to the trade deadline. So make sure you follow us there. And I am also live tweeting during nearly every Islanders home and road game. So join me for some instant insight and analysis. And it's great to talk Islanders hockey with you, game time or anytime. Oh, yes, I did forget hero and go to the game. The go to the game is the penalty kill. They gave up 2 power play goals. And obviously, I'm going to make Brock Nelson the hero of the game. A goal and an assist in what may be his final game as an Islander. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. And of course, let's go Islanders.